thanks for agreeing to chat a little bit about your book. I just want to start by saying congratulations on getting a book out there in the public, and that must feel like such an accomplishment.
Yeah, thanks, my friend. It's a labor of love writing these things and publishing it, and the response to the book makes all the hard work really worth it. The response has been overwhelming, and it's just so nice to hear from friends and families and family members and colleagues across the United States who read the book, who enjoyed it, and so it's been super fun.
Well, that's amazing. Good for you. I think I told you in the email, but I'll say it again. I think this was the fastest that I've read a book since like the Hunger Games or something like that. I'm not a fast reader, but I couldn't put this one down. So that was really a pleasure.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, and that's not on accident. I'm really mindful to make sure the pacing is fluid and it's fast, it's entertaining. There's not long, laborious paragraphs or sentences. So I've heard that a lot, and that makes me happy that people recognize that.
Well, that's great. Well, on that theme, I noticed that some of your chapters were so short, and I was interested how, some of the questions I have are just about some of the logic. I've always had a desire and an interest in writing a book one day. So I love talking to authors and hearing about their decisions they make. So, I know there's a decision for you. Some of the chapters weren't but a couple of pages. So I thought that was interesting. And was that a pacing decision, or was that just, the model or template you went with, just revolved around that, just really short, bite-sized kind of themes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love these deep dive sort of questions on writing and the craft of writing. And I certainly am not the first person to sort of tweak the length of chapters. And so, I think everybody loves a page burner, or a page turner, and ending those chapters and, those sort of little cliffhangers. And I feel like every show on a streaming channel like Netflix or Hulu or whatever the case may be, that's sort of a winning formula. But, I chatted with my editor about that, quite extensively. And I think it's really good to, change up the rhythm, break it up. And so I think when you're reading, people can get in this sort of muscle memory where they're just, you're reading, your mind can drift. And I think if you break it up, and it can really sort of keep the reader engaged. So there's times where I had much longer chapters that sort of bounced back in the same time, but bounced back in different scenes. Then I had a chapter that would be 1 or 2 pages, and so really just wanted to be respectful for the reader, breaking up the pacing. I don't want things to get complacent or boring, each chapter being the same word count or those types of things. And so I think, very similar to music, if you're composing a song and you have an intro and a bridge and a chorus, and anytime you can sort of get out of that formulaic sort of expression and change it up, that's my mindset there.
Great. No, that makes perfect sense. And it obviously worked for this story. So how long did you have the idea for the book before you started writing it? Is this something you've been cooking since you were a child and always had a fascination? Was the rock quarry there as a child, or is that something you made up completely?
That's been actually the biggest question that everybody asks. And it's really funny, particularly my friends and family and readers from New England have asked that question about the quarry itself. Like, was it completely fictional? Was it inspired by a real swimming hole or a lake? And if so, which one was it? And it's kind of funny. It's always funny when you see things on social media or online that you're not participating in, that is about your piece of work, right? And so my dad, who lives in Rhode Island, he's lived in Rhode Island his entire life. He sent me this thread on a Facebook group where people read the book and they were debating which quarry it was, which lake it was. And there was some controversy. Some people thought it was one lake. Some people thought it was another one. I didn't participate in the conversation. I was just sort of a fly on the wall reading it. And it was kind of fun just to read complete strangers, that you've never met before, sort of debating the book and the location. But I can tell you that when I was a kid growing up, about 12 years old, there were a few swimming holes around the state, and we would ride our bikes to them. And so the inspiration certainly came from that. But I think what I ended up doing, I actually confused a couple of the swimming holes we used to go to. They all had different nicknames, and it's funny, every generation has a different nickname or slang for the swimming hole. And so we actually had one swimming hole that I think it was a reservoir that was called Acapulco. And so what I ended up doing was, referencing that name, and then combining a couple of the different real swimming holes we used to go to, some of the features and of those lakes, and sort of sprinkle in a little bit of fiction. So it's 1/3 fiction, 1/3 reality, and then probably 1/3 just different memories of those swimming holes. And so that was really sort of fun to invent.
That's great. I'm just taking notes here as we're talking. Okay, so back to, how long did you have the idea for the book? When did the inspiration hit you, and what was the lag between having that and starting to write it?
Oh yeah, you mentioned that earlier in the question. And Labor Day weekend, 2017, a good friend of mine and the dad of my friends back home in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, had passed away of cancer. And before he died, he asked me to write and read his eulogy. And I did. And it was well received, it's so well received. It just, really just made me so happy that I was able to sort of entertain his family and friends, and at the same time sort of talk about his life and the life he lived. And when I was done, so many people came up to me and said, this would be a great book. These stories are so entertaining. You should write a book. And so, and that, by the way, that never occurred to me. And so I wrote a small memoir. It's called The Potato Puff Surprise. And it's essentially a tribute to my friend and my friend's dad, Joe Kelly. He was this really sort of, interesting guy, baby boomer, hippie from the 60s, owned a painting company and a home improvement company. And they don't make them like that anymore. This guy was really just, an eclectic, eccentric blues man, and really an interesting, unique character. And it was a lot of fun to write about him. And the book was, really well received. And so that sort of gave me the writing bug. I wanted to, write another book. This time I wanted to take a stab at writing fiction. And when I was writing The Potato Puff Surprise, just organically, I had a couple of ideas for stories, and centered around Pawtucket, Rhode Island. I always loved, growing up in New England, and Stephen King obviously living in New England. I always loved that he set his stories in New England, in Maine, even if they were in fictional towns in Maine. And so I was thinking, how fun would it be to write stories about Pawtucket, Rhode Island, the smallest state in the United States, and just an interesting sort of historical state in the United States. And so I just thought the idea of a haunted quarry lake would be a lot of fun. And so I had that idea sort of towards the end of The Potato Puff Surprise. And then that book was done, I jumped right into the next project. And it sort of spilled out of me. There wasn't a lot of drafting or outlining or, creating spreadsheets of characters or anything like that. It was just sort of seat of the pants. I had this idea. It was, itching at me to get out. And so just sat down and wrote it. And, the timing was interesting, to be honest. So I wrote the story during the pandemic. And there was something, just comforting about going back in time. The story takes place in the 80s and in my hometown. And there was just something comforting about going back to that time in the 1980s, back in my hometown. And, times just seem less complicated then, less scarier then. And so, particularly during the stay-at-home orders during the pandemic, and, being sort of trapped in your house. And it was always it was a bit of relief just to sit down at night after work in front of my computer and write Acapulco.
That's great. And that kind of answers another question I had, because as a, I know how busy you are with work and how much responsibility you have there, and you're a family man. I wondered when you actually had time to write this story. And so it sounds like nighttime, was that typically it, kind of end of the day after dinner? Or was it all over the board, like just when it would hit you? Or did you have kind of a set time? Okay, I'm writing for 30 minutes to an hour every night, and you just went at it during that period?
Yeah, I like to keep a pretty regimented writing schedule. And so at the time during the pandemic, my wife, Kathy, is a nurse, and she was working in hospice, and she had overnight shifts. And so I would utilize my time of her working overnight shifts to do a lot of my writing. And so I typically write on nights and weekends. Obviously, I'm very busy during the day with my job. And so nights and weekends is when I write. And when my wife, Kathy, was working overnights, my daughter's a teenager now, so she's certainly much more self-sufficient these days and doesn't need dad hanging around her all the time. So I took that time, that opportunity to write. So I typically write nights and weekends.
Wonderful. Got it. And I mean, just a little bit more structural. You said it just kind of came out of you. You weren't doing long outlines. So were you writing it in chronological order, or did you just come up with chapters and fill it in, or did you kind of write it as a continuum?
Yeah, so if you read any writing blogs or listen to famous authors, there's sort of two camps, right? There's called pantsers and there's outliners. And pantsers is just a writer who likes to write by the seat of his pants, just making it up as he goes. A famous example of a pantser would be Stephen King. He doesn't do a lot of outlining. And then an opposite, a popular outliner would be somebody like Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code. He likes to have everything sort of mapped out in advance and have spreadsheets of characters and have all of these sort of times and chronological scenes unfold. He likes to map that all out in advance. And I like to think of myself as sort of just a little bit in between both of them, just a little bit of a hybrid, probably sway more to the pantser side. I like to come up with a loose idea, so I sort of have an idea for a beginning, middle, and end. I know that sounds super simple, but storytelling is that simple. And so I sort of come up with a premise like, oh, it'd be really fun to write about a haunted quarry lake where something magical happens. And so that's sort of the premise. And then I think through, what would that story look like in the beginning, the middle, and the end? And then, and if you have a good ending, you can sort of work backwards. And so that's just a loose premise, a loose outline. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of holes to be filled in that premise. So I sort of come up with the story, like just the storyline of the idea of the story, come up with a beginning, middle, and end, and then I spend a tremendous amount of time sort of filling in the blanks. And that's when I'm jealous of writers who do outlining.
Yeah.
A lot of writers do that for a reason, but I'm sort of in the middle.
Great. No, that's great. Well, that's enough structural stuff. Now I want to get into some of the meat of some of your decisions. And I realize that some of these questions may not have answers, and that might be on purpose, or you might not. I also respect if you don't want to reveal the answers because you don't want to, spoil any of the mystique. So let's get into the ghost. Towards the end of the story, we hear about the car that went over, and we start thinking, okay, is this tied to the spirit of the person who went over in the car? That's, to me, it was never the concrete. It seemed like that was a kind of your obvious solution. But there was a little bit of an open door there where it was like, well, that seems like a convenient explanation for the ghost. Is it made that way to be open-ended, or was it, no, that's 100% it? Or did you want that to be for the reader to decide?
That's a good question. Nobody's asked me that before, so thank you. I've got to be honest. I've always liked or enjoyed non-linear stories. If you take a TV show like Lost, I know that frustrated a lot of people who like things to be perfectly packaged and have a beginning, middle, of end, and have the whole story bookend. I've never been that person. I can keep things nebulous. I like a little bit of nonlinear storytelling. And so I tried to sprinkle a little bit of that in, but at the same time, I also really sort of was intrigued with the backstory of the nun, Sister Mary Frances. And I just thought it was a nice layer of the story, her flashback of her growing up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island in the 1960s, having a boyfriend during high school who was killed in sort of a freak accident in the quarry before it was filled. And in terms of, her boyfriend's spirit still roaming the quarry lake, I let the readers decide if that's him or not.
Great. No, that's great. And I was kind of hoping that was the case. And I totally respect the open-endedness. I mean, books like, or movies like Inception, I mean, the ending of that one, literally, it opens the debate for endless amount of time. Right. No one knows about that one, or I can think of several where it's like, it's great. I like a book that makes me want to have this conversation, or a movie that gets people talking and you keep reflecting on it. And the more you watch it or read it, there's more there, versus just, you read it, you go from start to finish. Now you got it. That there's no spoilers. There's nothing to think about. You've enjoyed the story. So this is fun. It's something you can come back to and actually see it from a different angle. More about the spirit, because obviously that's my probably favorite character in the book. It starts almost more like, I feel like the first few times we're introduced to it, it's almost like the spirit is trying to keep the boys away from the quarry. It's scaring them. It's transporting them from places. And then it went from just taking them from one side of the quarry to another to a whole different place. And I thought that was a little bit of maybe foreshadowing. And then obviously at the big climax at the end, where the boys are having the fight underwater, next thing you know, they're on the river, which I did not see coming at all. I mean, that was kind of a big, like, shock to me. And I kept asking myself, what was the motivation there for the spirit? Was the spirit actually trying to resolve their differences so they walked away? And the only way to do that is by putting, one of their lives in danger and creating that opportunity for survival, And so again, this kind of, my question is it was that set up to be ambiguous on purpose to create this discussion? Or did you have a real motivation to say, no, this is a almost like a guardian angel type spirit who's come to love this character and is trying to help him and make their lives better? So that's probably was my most motivation for wanting to talk to you, to kind of lean into that and find out more about the spirit's motivation.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to thoughtfully sort of think through that analysis. I loved hearing you articulate that. I will say I was always sort of intrigued by, thrusting, a protagonist and an antagonist together in the exact same scene, and sort of having to make a very difficult decision. My last two books have sort of, even though they're not for kids or they're not traditional young adult, it's sort of like Stranger Things, right? They're shows for adults, they're stories for adults that are about kids, and we were all kids, and we probably all encountered a bully at one point in our life. And obviously Billy is the bully in Acapulco and Simon's the protagonist. And so I always thought it would be a really interesting dilemma to sort of put those natural enemies into a juxtaposition where Simon had to make a decision, a very difficult decision. Obviously Billy has tormented him and made his life incredibly difficult, and then in the climatic scene he is forced with a very difficult decision. Do I save the life of the person who has bullied me and tortured me in my entire childhood? And so it was really fun to sort of explore that topic. I will say that in my mind, Simon is a good kid. He's a good person. He's very sensitive. And I'd like to think he would make the right decision to save his classmate, and whether he liked that kid or not. And so, and then if you layer the smoke and the smoke monster into that scene, I also love how readers will interpret different things, like you just articulated. And so, was the smoke trying to prevent them from something, more harmful in the lake at that time? And or the opposite, was he trying to lure them in? I like keeping that sort of open-ended and letting the reader interpret that. I always respect the intelligence and the opinions of my readers, but I will tell you this. What I really wanted to do was explore the connection of the smoke and Simon. And so obviously Simon becomes obsessed with learning more about the smoke, even to the detriment of his friends. And he has a falling out with his friends, and he's forced to choose to continue to explore the smoke and learn more about it when his friends want nothing to do with it. And so I really wanted to explore that dynamic with Billy and Simon being thrust into a no-win situation, and then the smoke sort of being the catalyst for that. And then in terms of whether the smoke was good, bad, indifferent, was it trying to lure the boys into harm, or maybe prevent them from additional hazardous opportunities or danger or anything like that? I prefer to let the readers make that decision themselves. And I don't feel like I'm copping out on that. I just, I always love, if you look at some of the great pieces of literature in our lifetime, in wonderful books that we read growing up in school or in our personal lives. I think some of the master writers and craftsmen, men and women, just they do that. They do it subtly and they do it well. Even if you go back and, we're in the Halloween season now, and if you look at Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, sure, she leaves a lot of that moral compass or those philosophical debates open to her readers. And I always enjoyed that about Frankenstein.
That's well done and well played. And I think that's a more sophisticated approach. Really, it's probably harder to do that with the finesse and the subtle ways. But anytime you can get that conversation debate going after the fact, I think it's great. And with your readers, and it'd be fun to watch some of those discussions taking place, like you were saying, kind of being a fly on the wall and seeing what people are talking and thinking. And I remember in high school, one of my favorite writers, Tim McLaurin from Eastern North Carolina, he's passed away now, but he was on stage and people were asking him about some of the small things in his book and trying to place meaning to them. And I'll never forget, he kind of replied to some of the teachers who are very, these are some heavy hitting people with their doctorates in literature. And he said, guys, it doesn't always have to have a meaning. Sometimes it's just it's a nice image, or it's something like that. You're putting meaning to things that I didn't mean to be there. And there's also times where we overanalyze, right? And we have to stop ourselves and say, you know what, you're going too far with this. Or the fact that the smoke, kept them in the lake here and moved them there, that might not mean anything. It might, but it might not. And I think that provides a lot of fun. So I really applaud you for that.
I will say that the smoke transporting the boys across the lake is certainly a bit of foreshadowing, right? A technique to sort of place a little clue in the beginning to something that could happen to more intensely later in the story. And so, yeah, certainly there's a bit of foreshadowing there, sort of teasing that this monster has the ability, just the general premise, to take a person or an object in one place and move it to the next.
Yeah. And also, I mean, back to Simon and that fascination with the monster. I mean, there's two things there. One is he has such bravery, right? He has to go when his friends are there and saw this thing. And now they're all running, but he goes back by himself, which is an amazingly brave act. But furthermore, you've kind of done the classic example where it's almost too hard to believe. So now people are like, well, wait, you got transported? What? That doesn't make sense. So you're almost creating this. Is he having hallucinations? Is he kind of off the reservation? What's happening to him? And he sticks to it and he stays with it. And ultimately, it serves him well. And it really created a lot of respect for me. And when you were saying this fascination with him, there was also the comfort level with the monster, right? Because there at the end of the climax, he kind of had this advantage where Billy was kind of panicking and what was happening, and he's surrendering. And it took me back to my days of scuba diving. I did deep water technical diving, and a lot of times we were down below thermoclines, zero visibility, at times diving on shipwrecks that had maybe bodies there. So you're almost on a graveyard, very spooky scenes. And for whatever reason, I had this comfort level with it and always felt this ability to surrender and go into that. And so I was kind of reconnecting with that when I saw that from Simon, and thought that was really interesting how that happened in the end, and put him in that position to make the decision, and kind of gave him, it really empowered him more and more, right? This ghost that could be seen as such a menace or something to be scared of, actually he didn't have that fear, and it gave him an opportunity, and ultimately led to him repairing that friendship, which, who knows, down the road, something like that, people who are enemies that turn into friends, those stories always work out really well. So I just think it's that whole story and that arc of his relationship were really fascinating to me.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been interesting. A lot of people have asked me, is this a series? Will there be additional stories? And the two stories that people would love to read about, that multiple people keep telling me about, is one, will Billy and Simon team up to investigate further and continue to investigate the smoke and the lake? And then the second one is, a lot of people want to learn more about Sister Mary Frances and her time in this, her time, which would, and looking at the timeline, would be in the 1960s. She was in high school in the 1960s, and seeing, was there anything in the lake before her boyfriend was,
there you
go. Involved in that freak death, dying in that freak accident type of way. And so those are certainly two stories that I would love to explore. And I think there could be a lot of fun in them. And then, not to say that Acapulco is like Harry Potter and there's this, 10-book series or something, but I do think it would be a lot of fun to explore those two topics. And the other thing I'll say, that I sort of alluded to this, but a lot of people haven't asked me this, but I'm happy to share it, is I didn't explore it, tangibly. I just sort of alluded to it, but I was always intrigued to it. Obviously, Simon is a great kid, hardworking, is a good student. He's 12 years old, and he does a paper route. He has a paper route, and he earns money, and he gives it to his family. And his family certainly isn't wealthy. They live in a trailer park, on the other side of the tracks. And Simon's 12 years old now, and he's starting to see, just different classes and wealth and other schools, and sort of that, he's sort of, for the first time in his life, recognizing that there's a difference between being rich and poor, having resources and not having resources, and seeing his friends with designer clothes and fancy bicycles and things like that. And he has none of those things. And so I sort of, I didn't want to do it blatantly, but I wanted to explore, Simon with his relationship with the smoke, where he begins to feel like, hey, this entity is comforting, and it's, it's making me feel not, sort of like, having him forget about his upbringing, and that he lives in a trailer park, and there might be better things for him. And it is an illusion, obviously. But I thought it was really interesting, because kids growing up, they don't know their status in the community or in their family. They don't know or care if their family's wealthy or they're impoverished, whatever case may be. And I thought it was, again, that juxtaposition of having, just that theme of, the haves versus have-nots, or wealth versus not having wealth, and what that looks like for that individual person. And obviously Curtis has a lot more opportunities in life, than Simon does. And so that was sort of interesting to sort of explore a little bit too.
Well, and that's one of the great things about Wilderness. And as they ended up on the river, the Wilderness is a great equalizer, right? Status doesn't matter when it's life and death. It's all down to character and ability to stay cool under pressure. And
totally.
So we saw Simon rise, and it's almost like in It's a Wonderful Life, at the end there, it's like he's the richest man in town, even though he doesn't have any money. So
totally, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So Simon's really the one with the wealth, even though he's the one with the less money than anyone else in the book.
Absolutely.
So, well, another obvious question, I guess, for everybody, or at least I had, was what happens to the monster when the query's filled in, right? I wanted to know about, was it haunting the guys filling it in, with the guys out there, the construction guys, were they seeing it, or now where does it go? And so there's definitely some what happens to the monster when the water's gone.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see, but I will promise you this, that those stories aren't done. And so as I mentioned earlier, I'd love to explore the nun and her backstory even greater. And I myself want to find out, a little bit more about her. And so I can promise you that the story isn't done, and that we haven't seen the last of Simon or Billy or any of the crew.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Can't wait to see what happens and come up with new questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say too, Simon was I feel like there's a little bit of me in all of the characters. Simon, I share a lot with Simon, and he was a lot of fun to write, but I sort of always envisioned the hero being Hannah, his little sister. And certainly Simon's brave, but I feel like Hannah's the bravest. And it's never easy being a youngest sibling, whether you're a boy or a girl. Never easy being a youngest sibling. You're always having to prove yourself. You're always having to try to hang with the older kids. And having a daughter myself, I just always wanted to write I just love how Hannah swoops in at the end of the story and saves the day. And so I just love that.
Perfect surprise. And as the youngest of three, I certainly feel that pain, and would have loved nothing more than the hero at some point. And that I think when you asked the favorite characters, I replied saying that she was. So that was a great moment. So, well, Tom, that wraps it up for me. And great answers. Thanks for all the insights. It was a pleasure, and thanks for taking this time today.
Yeah, thanks, my friend. Thank you so much for the love and support, and love to chat anytime.
Awesome.
All right, bye, my friend.
See ya.